HotWireFoamCutterInfo.com presents the Small Handheld Cutter. The small hand cutter is meant for small-scale uses like miniature tabletop terrain, touch-ups on RC wings, or any other modeling use. This cutter really only needs a few simple components but can be custom made depending on your project. The cutter has a length of ½ inch scheduled 40 PVC as the handle and a single T-coupler onto which two metal arms are attached. These metal arms may be made out of soft copper tubing, or you can use a length of brass tubing. Soft copper tubing is recommended as it is found at most hardware stores and is physically easier to work with and manipulate by hand. Around 3/8 to 1/4 inch tubing is appropriate. The length, width, and degree of arc of your cutter depends upon your project, but approximately 6 inches of tubing should be sufficient for all hobby uses. You'll want to look for a gradual taper that creates a full 90-degree bend. The metal arms are attached to the T-coupler using thumb screws, washers, and wing nuts. The thumb screws should be at least 2 inches long, but not to exceed 3 inches in overall length. You can orient the thumb screws and wing nuts in either direction, but remember to include the washers to obtain an even distribution of pressure on the metal tubing and the T-coupler. Note that the ring terminals for electrical attachment are also attached directly onto each thumb screw. At the end of each metal arm, there are a few options for nichrome wire attachment. The easiest is to simply notch the tubing and place the wire directly onto the tube, but you may also choose to add thumb screws for a more secure attachment. You'll want to select a screw length of less than 1½ inches, with 3/4 inch being the most ideal. Again, orient the screws and wing nuts that suits your project, but remember to include the washers to obtain a good compression. If you choose to include all metal components for attachment, you will require the following: 2 long 10-24 thumb screws, not to exceed 3 inches in total length. 2 short 10-24 thumb screws, not to exceed 1½ inches in length. 2 ring terminals for electrical attachment. 4 10-24 wing nuts, and 10 number 10 washers. Start by attaching the PVC handle to the coupler, which will require PVC primer and cement. First, apply the primer to clean and soften the PVC. Then apply the PVC cement and attach the two components, which will create a strong bond. Next, take the soft copper tubing and measure for length. Around 5 to 6 inches should be sufficient for most hobby applications. You can cut the copper tubing using either a hacksaw or a pipe cutter. A pipe cutter is ideal as it can be locked into place on the copper tubing. As the pipe cutter is rotated around the pipe, take note that the screw is being adjusted to make a deeper cut into the metal. Simply remeasure the tubing and repeat the cutting process for the other metal arm. Then check to be sure both arms are equal length. You can always trim off a little excess if you desire. Now start the process of gradually creating the arm's arc. You'll always want to double check it to your handheld cutter to make sure the arc is appropriate for your project. There are tools that will help you bend the copper tubing, but using a groove like a slat between two boards, you can help the tube keep shape as you bend it by hand. Once the tubing is warm enough, you can make small corrections in the palm of your hand, taking care to not crimp the tubing. Repeat this process for both arms and then make sure the arc is appropriate. The arms will be mounted on the face of the T-coupler and will need to be crimped flat to allow a firm compression. Using a vise, you'll want to keep yourself oriented as you crimp. Once the tubing is in the vise, take your time and make sure the crimp is proper and lined up with the arc of the cutting arm. You'll want to have approximately a third to a half inch of crimped tubing. Then repeat for the other arm. Place the crimped tubing into the vise so that it lays flat. Take a 1/4 inch drill bit and drill through the copper tubing. Start out very slow. This will allow a small amount of copper to be chewed away and prevent the drill from sliding off mark. Then recrimp the tubing to flatten any rough edges. As we will be using the notched method with this cutter, take one of the uncrimped ends and score around the top, but do not perforate the tubing just yet. Back at the vise, lightly place the copper tubing as to expose the outer curved surface. Taking a fine-toothed hacksaw, cut about 1/4 to halfway through the copper tubing. This cut and scored area will act as a groove to hold the nichrome wire. Place the arm back into the vise vertically, and using the hacksaw, notch out the top for a final place of attachment for the nichrome wire. It looks a little rough, but this is an easy and simple way to attach the nichrome wire to your metal arms. Back at your PVC assembly, you'll need to mark holes for drilling, but depending on the amount of crimped tubing, your holes may be further out from center. Simply recrimp to gain more depth, but take care to not allow the two metal arms to touch one another. Back at the vise, situate the PVC so that it is positioned horizontally. That way, when the holes are drilled vertically, it will obtain a perfect 90-degree hole that will align the thumb screws and metal arms. Again, start out drilling slowly so that the drill bit does not slide off mark. One last final hole needs to be drilled into the center of the T-coupler. Once the first layer of PVC is penetrated, angle the drill horizontally so it creates a channel for the electrical wire. Here you can see the hole placement, which is now ready for the metal components. Take the electrical connection wire and pass it through the angled hole. You'll need to leave a little excess at the top for the ring terminal attachment. Split the two wires and then strip the ends accordingly. Slide on each ring terminal and then crimp tightly. With the ring terminals complete, you will now need the metal arms, 2 thumb screws, 4 washers, and 2 wing nuts to attach all metal components. Start by taking 1 thumb screw, place a single washer, and then the metal arm. Then slide the thumb screw through the T-coupler and place 1 ring terminal. Place the final washer and then the wing nut to secure the entire assembly in place. Once the first side is assembled, simply repeat all the previous steps for the other metal arm. Now that all the metal components are attached, tighten the screws and adjust the arms as needed. Next, you will want to secure the electrical wire to prevent damage. Pass a small amount of wire into the handle and bend a loop of wire upwards against the PVC. Secure the wire in place with a few passes of electrical tape. Then, manipulate a second loop of electrical wire downwards and secure it in place as well. This technique will create a very secure stress loop, which will prevent the electrical wire from dislodging off of the ring terminals during use. Now the nichrome wire will need to be placed onto the metal arms. Start by placing the open end of the nichrome wire into the notch that faces the center of the cutter. Rotate the wire around the tubing to lock the open end in place, and then pass the wire through the groove and cut portions of the tubing. Be sure to pull tightly and secure the nichrome wire into that cut groove. Transition to the other cutting arm where the technique for attachment will be a little different. Start by forcefully pulling the nichrome into the cut groove. Then rotate around the copper tubing and secure into the notched ends. This technique can ensure the smallest amount of nichrome wire is used. But with ample length, feel free to wrap the nichrome wire around the tubing as much as you desire. Tighten the thumb screws, wing nuts, and metal arms until you have proper tension on the nichrome wire. For all intensive purposes, the small hand cutter is complete, but you may opt to add connectors to the end of your electrical wire for attachment to the power supply. Here, we are using crimp-on snap bullet connectors. Split the wires, strip the ends, and crimp on the connectors. The hand cutter can now easily be attached to the power supply. A quick quality control test will ensure that everything is in proper working order. And there you have it, the small handheld hot wire foam cutter, perfect for all small-scale hobby uses. Thank you for watching, and remember to check out the website for all related diagrams and information.